All right. Welcome to another episode of The Close-Up, a part of the Orlando Magic HQ Network. I'm your host, Stephen Cameron, and here today we have a great episode. We have Jason Beede of the Orlando Sentinel joining us. We have a really good conversation. We talk a lot about what's going on with this team right now. Obviously, it's not a super positive conversation because, you know, the Magic are out two of their stars. They just got their butts kicked by the Knicks last night. You know, the team's dealing with some other injuries on and off throughout the roster. So it's a very good conversation. It's a conversation that needs to happen and needs to be heard. Bring out a lot of realizations with this team, but also, you know, let's just be realistic. It's a different tone than when we talk about the Magic going on a 6-game winning streak like we were earlier in the season. But yeah, he's great. I love Jason. He always brings a great perspective. He's at every game. He's at every practice. He covers the team very well for the Orlando Sentinel. Before we get into the conversation with Jason, though, I do want to remind you all of a few things. Orlando Magic HQ's got a really cool giveaway going on right now. All you got to go do is go to one of our social media pages, go to the pinned page. So if you're on Twitter, if you're on Instagram, go to the pinned post and type in the word subscribed and then subscribe to this YouTube channel, right? All you got to do is subscribe to the YouTube channel and type in the word subscribed into the pinned post. And then on Christmas Eve, we're going to be announcing the winner for a City Edition jersey of your choice. Very easy contest to fill into. Subscribe, comment subscribed on the pinned post, and winner will be chosen and announced on Christmas Eve. So we're really looking forward to that. Outside of that, we want to shout out the people that make this happen. Brandon Kravitz is a good friend of ours. We love what he's doing. He's got an awesome party coming up. Zone Heads, it's your time of the year, and Brandon Kravitz is partnering with Hourglass Brewing in downtown Orlando for an epic holiday celebration. It's the relaunch of the Zone Heads 35 with that classic Magic pinstripe look. It's a delicious seasonable IPA that beer enthusiasts and Magic fans alike will absolutely love. Head over to Hourglass Brewing on Curry Ford Road Friday, December 20th for the official release and hang out with Brandon Kravitz and the crew starting at 6 p.m. I got to try this beer last year. It's really awesome. As a Magic fan, it's always really cool to see my friends in the community doing cool things. Hourglass Brewing, I've always enjoyed their beer when I come home. Every year I go to the Hourglass Brewing in Longwood and have beers. It's great to see Brandon, my friend, teaming up with them again to do his Orlando Magic 96 Zone Heads beer. Also, all new episodes of the Zone Head podcast with Brandon and his new co-host, Zach, are available wherever you're downloading your favorite podcasts. Catch Brandon Kravitz live on The Zone weekdays on 96.9 The Game days starting at 3:30 p.m. That's In the Zone with Brandon Kravitz. Also, Patreons. If join our Patreon program, consider joining it. We got 2 different tiers. It's really fun. You get double entries for contests just like the one we're running earlier, plus a ton of exclusive content just for you. So check out our Patreon program. It's linked below. With all that being said, let's get into this conversation that I have with Jason Beede of the Orlando Sentinel. All right, everyone. Like I said, we got Jason Beede of the Orlando Sentinel, Orlando Magic beat reporter. Jason, how's it going today? Thanks for coming on the show.
Doing good. I'm, as we said a moment ago before we started recording, I'm looking forward to more games, but the 2 games in 10 days was also nice as beat reporter. So enjoying a little break, although I don't really get a day off, but it's a little different.
Yeah, definitely probably feels a little bit different not having to go to games, stay up late that way, not having to do any travel for road trips, just kind of like resetting. I was mentioning earlier, like I'm enjoying the time off. It's nice to not feel like I'm missing something when I don't watch basketball for like a day or two. Granted, I am using this time to catch up with some other teams, but it definitely feels good to have a few games, a few days off here. Jason, it's been a while since we've talked. We chatted earlier at the beginning of the season. Since then, Paulo has gone out. Franz has gone out. Jonathan Isaac, Wendell Carter Jr., Gary Harris have all missed significant amounts of time. Thankfully, we're recording this on Monday, December 16th, probably coming out on Tuesday, but no news is going to come out between now and then because of the current schedule, most likely. The Magic just lost to the Knicks at home, their first home game loss what has happened since we first started to today that has caused this team to have so many injuries again to their primary stars on such a weird injury that's already rare? What's going on, Jason?
Yeah, it's not really a basketball injury, is it? It's more of a baseball injury, I guess. Like you think about swinging of the bat with the hip and whatnot. Basketball, you hear ACLs or Achilles or shoulders or something
Yeah.
of that nature. So when it first happened with Paolo, it was strange. And then I was traveling back from Philadelphia it the day the news broke on Franz. And I mean, I don't want to say when I heard it, it was a joke. Obviously, it wasn't a joke in any sense or form, but it almost felt like a prank to a degree in the sense of not only did he suffer an injury that's going to keep him sidelined for over a month, right? But it's also the exact same injury that the team's other superstar suffered. The same side, like the same torn right oblique, like
Yeah.
same kind of similar play. Like they didn't even exactly find. I don't know if you watched the CNC game, but Jared Greenberg said that they didn't even really know specifically what play it happened on. But he, similarly to Paolo, I was on the road trip, in Cleveland when it happened, and then, or I guess Chicago, and then we were in Cleveland right after that. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary with Franz either. My point. I was in the locker room in Philadelphia afterwards with Josh Robbins, and we were talking to Franz and joking and having normal conversation and talking about the game and talking about basketball. And just like with Paolo, everything seemed normal until we got the word that something was up. And, look, I think since the beginning of the season, obviously, when you lose Paolo, your expectations have to obviously change. I'm sure internally they changed. And now, obviously, with Franz going down, even though there's belief that Paolo should be back sooner than later, to have both of them off the court at the same time is rare since Paolo's been drafted. They had only played one game without the two of them on the same time, on the court at the same time since Paolo was drafted. For both of them to miss X amount of games, multiple games at the same time is not something that they've really dealt with since they took Paolo number one overall in 2022. Look, I think we'll dive into specifics, but certainly weird circumstance. And look, in regards to, there's some fans that talk about, this falls on the head of, the medical staff or whatever it is. I mean, they're I like the way Franz put it. There's no one to blame for this. I mean, it is weird. It is
Yeah.
wonky. I understand that, maybe they could do some drills that led to this or overworked their abdominal muscles, but like they're basketball players. They play basketball, and it is a rare injury. I don't know. I don't think there's a conspiracy there that this XYZ led to this happening. So I think Franz and Paolo have both been mature about it, and I'm sure they've asked questions, obviously internally. No, I just think Franz said it best. Like I don't think there's anyone really to blame for it, but they're continuing to battle without their stars, continuing to fight, continuing to find ways to win. Obviously, they didn't beat the Knicks the other night, and that came after a loss in Milwaukee, but they're staying afloat as best they can.
Yeah, it is very weird, and I'm not one to go say like it's the training staff's fault, like I'm sure they're a very competent, very veteran training staff led by a very well respected person in Arnie Kander around the league, and a very well coached staff, like, and I imagine because they are so good and they are so veteran, they're analyzing themselves to double check, like to see what they're doing, right? Did we do something? They're doing that on their own. We don't, they're good. That's what they do, right? So like it is, in my opinion, just like this weird, just freak accident from a very physical game that has just so happened to happen twice to our team. Again, it must be in the water then. If it's not the training staff, it's not just something in the water in Orlando, Jason. I don't know, but make sure you're drinking your filtered tap water, right? But jokes aside, this Magic team did a pretty good job building themselves a buffer, right? For a long time, they had like a good 4 or 5 game gap on the New York Knicks. The Knicks had a slow start to the season. Like many teams, the Magic have officially been jumped by them. Today they sit for the first time in the 4th seed in many, many weeks. They have a 17-11 record. The Knicks have played a few less games, so they have a couple less losses. So that's why they are ahead of them. They are 16-10. When you saw that gap has finally shifted, Did anything in your mindset shift with this team, with them coming down a little bit further and now, again, a couple more weeks potentially without Paulo, at least another month-ish without Franz. Like, I guess my question to you is the gap is not there anymore. What does this team have to do to maintain, particularly when you look at the upcoming schedule? It is a homestand, so that is nice, but it's versus the Thunder. It's versus the Heat twice, versus the Celtics, versus the Knicks again. And then the last game of the month is the Nets. Not exactly an easy schedule there. The Heat are kind of a mixed bag this year, a little up and down, but still very good players. Fifth in the East right now. The Nets just got a little bit worse with their Dennis Schroeder trade. So, that's probably a win there. Paulo, in my perspective, has a good chance of being back by then, if not maybe a little bit before then. I have no inside information. That's just me speculating a little bit there. When you look at this coming schedule to finish this year, like, what are your just thoughts around all that, knowing that Paulo's not going to be here for a couple of these games, potentially all of them, depending on how long his ramp up, and Franz is definitely out. What are you thinking?
Yeah, I think, New York game last night on Sunday night, really, I guess, was the start of a 7-game stretch. And
Yeah.
they've already lost that first one, right? I think if you look at these next 6, like going to 3-3 is probably the goal, with assuming Paulo doesn't return during the stretch, which again, I myself, I'm not going to sit here and act like I know specifically. I'm not even sure if they know yet. I mean,
Yeah.
they have internal timelines, but until we hear Jamal Mosley say that yes, he's practicing, or yes, he's doing contact, or yes, he's playing 3-on-3 or 5-on-5, like literally all he's doing right now is some spot shooting, some light court movement. He's the last we heard was he's not cutting, he's not sprinting yet. Stuff can change. As he continues to ramp up, of course, and the hope is that he gets to do more of that stuff. But until we hear, although they don't practice a whole lot, until we hear that he's going through contact or going through on more on court stuff, like I'm not expecting him to play Thursday or next week. I mean,
I'm not either.
We're still multiple. I just think from a realistic perspective about what Paolo's told me and told other reporters and what Jamal said, and it was interesting that on Friday, backtracking a little bit, we got to practice on Friday, and Jamal said, that was the 6-week mark for Paolo. Jamal said he hadn't practiced yet, and he's still doing the light shooting, the light ball movement, and whatnot. And then we came into practice on Saturday, and he was clearly shooting in front of the media on purpose. That was some great video that, Phil and I and Mason Williams and I were all able to get. That, I'm not going to put my tinfoil hat on too much, but clearly we walked in there and he was shooting in front of the media. That was not on accident, I suppose.
Sure.
But that doesn't mean he's playing on Thursday or next week. I mean, look, I just think until we hear he's doing contact, it doesn't really mean much his return imminent unless you're really keeping it under the wraps. But with that said, you look at these next 6 games, yes, it is the Thunder. I think it's important to remember that the Thunder are obviously a really good team. They play in Las Vegas on Tuesday night. They either fly Tuesday night to Orlando or early Wednesday morning, and they play in Orlando on Thursday. So they're going to be really probably emotionally exhausted, at least, coming off whether they win the Cup championship or lose the Cup final out in Las Vegas with a long trip across multiple time zones to the East Coast to Orlando. So maybe there's some solace there that the Magic can take advantage of. They have the rest. They have 3 days off. They're going to practice at least once, I assume. And obviously, you face the Heat team twice. That's tricky. They beat them on opening night. That was a very different circumstance. Boston is Boston. Yes, they did just lose to the Knicks, but it was a relatively even game outside of one stretch that let New York take control of the game. And like you mentioned, Brooklyn is clearly sellers. They're on their way to tanking. So I just think if they can go 3-3 at this home stretch, obviously the Magic take great pride in protecting home court, and 3-3 is not internally, I'm sure, what they want, but realistically, if they could go 500 this next stretch until Paolo returns, if he is able to return this road trip, that would be awesome. But if he can't, I just think trying to remain afloat as much as possible until Paolo returns, and then eventually Franz, that's probably the key. It does help that they're at home, like you said, but these are really good teams that are coming to Kia Center, and it is interesting they play the Knicks again so soon, and actually they play them again in New York in early January. So that's interesting to see that team so often for that. It's such a physical style of basketball they play. Both sides play really. So I just think this home stretch is really just an opportunity for guys like Jalen Suggs, like a Wendell Carter Jr., like a KCP to maybe take control of this team and until Paolo and Franz return and say, look, this is an important stretch. I mean, we talked so much about the end of the year last year and how those losses towards the end of the season on the road cost them home court advantage in the playoffs. Really, this is the stretch of the point where maybe when we get to April, if they go 3-3 versus 2-4, or 4-2 versus 3-3 on this next 6 games, that could put them in a position to be still in the 4th spot or in the 5th spot. Like, this is a really important stretch in the grand scheme of things, that even though I think we all know that they're not themselves, right? If they had Gary Harris last night, maybe they win that game. If they had Paolo, they definitely probably win that game. I mean, they just needed someone else had to step up shot making wise. And obviously, you'd probably want to see Jalen Suggs be that guy in that position, but he's still progressing in that role, and it's a really challenging role to be in, quite frankly. But it's going to be interesting. I think we're going to learn a lot about this team over the rest of December, over the rest of the next homestand.
We are, for sure. Jason, when you're looking at a game like last night with the New York Knicks, and then you compare it to the Phoenix Suns game and the Milwaukee Bucks game, where actually the team had less resources. Jonathan Isaac was not available for the Phoenix Suns or the Milwaukee Bucks game. It was the same roster, same team. They are at home versus the Knicks, who some might even argue are less depth of a team than some of these other teams that they just pushed. They beat the Phoenix Suns. Granted, they didn't have Kevin Durant, but they were a fairly healthy team outside of that. I don't think they had Yusuf Nurkic either that game. They pushed a healthy Bucks team to a very full 48 minutes game. They lost, within the last minute-ish there in the quarterfinal of the NBA Cup game. And then they have this Knicks game. What did you see differently that was happening last night versus the Knicks on Sunday versus kind of how this team played, versus the Bucks and versus the Suns?
Yeah, I think you made good points about the Suns. Like, they didn't have Kevin Durant. Like, maybe things would have gone differently in that game, but I don't know. The Bucks, I thought that was a really impressive loss. I know that's not why you play basketball, to lose games, obviously, but
no one was disappointed with that loss.
No.
I mean, we were a little bit, but not because of, we understood the context.
Right. And I think the biggest factor for me last night was Jalen Suggs. And that's not to rain down on him. I just said a moment ago, like, he's in an incredibly difficult situation. Like, he's not a number one guy. He knows that. I think he fully accepts his role and understands he's happy to be in Orlando. He obviously signed a bigger contract this offseason to remain in Orlando, and he's one of the best defensive guards, in the league. He's going to be an all-defensive player again. Certainly has my vote. I just think sometimes, and this is a process for all of these players, they're still young, right? We don't want to put too much excuse on the youth, right? I can already hear some Magic fans saying that in the comments. But when you look at Jalen and this process, I just think his emotions took a little bit control of him against New York Knicks. You look at the way he picked up that 6th foul against Jalen Brunson. I think he probably should have known better in that position. He could lay off a little bit. I know he's a football player on the basketball court. I know he loves to play physical, and I know that the league has grown softer each and every year. And Jalen Suggs is the opposite of soft in every degree. But when he picked up that 6th foul with about 4 minutes left, like, that just didn't seem necessary. Even if he did foul or not foul, he put himself in a position in that mindset. And I just think the way he had performed those back-to-back games where he had 32 in Milwaukee, but he was really upset with himself after that Milwaukee loss. Like, he always wears his emotion on his sleeve. We've seen that, or wears his heart on his sleeve. He's not afraid to hide his emotions. That's kind of what drives him. It's kind of what drives Noah Wagner a little bit. But Jalen in Milwaukee said that was like the second game or something like that where he felt like he wasn't happy with how the end of game scenario went. And in Milwaukee specifically, he obviously missed those 2 3-pointers, the one that would have put them ahead, the one that would have tied. And against the Knicks, he wasn't even on the court to have those opportunities. So I just think, obviously if Tristan De Silva is going to be your leading scorer among your starters, obviously Tristan has impressed, and he's playing a lot more than anyone could have expected, including himself probably. I just don't think the Magic are going to win a lot of basketball games in that situation. So I just think Jalen, by getting too lost in the game, I guess. I mean, he missed his first 6 shots. He started 1 of 12 from the field. And he had slow starts in both those games against Phoenix and Milwaukee and Philadelphia, quite frankly. And he still ended with like 20 plus points and then even more in the past couple games before New York, of course. So, slow starts aren't necessarily a thing that bother him. He's going to shoot his shots. He's going to get his attempts. He's going to, that's the offense runs through him at this point with Powell and Franz out. I just think he got a little too involved in the emotions about that, and that led to him fouling out with 3 or 4 minutes to go. And by then, obviously the game had shifted, but I just think you need your best players on the court, and the fact that he didn't get it going in the second half, the way he had the past few games leading into that game, without that score there. Obviously, Mo Wagner had a career high 32 points, and I don't want to say rivalry, but his little battle with Karl-Anthony Towns is interesting.
It's fun.
It is fun, but I just think Jalen, of all the people, needs to understand how important he is. And I think he does, obviously.
Yeah.
But I think also just, again, when every possession matters, he has to be on the court for all of them. And that just to me was the biggest thing that I noticed last night. I was watching that. The fouling and I guess the lack of fouling, the fact that not a single Magic starter attempted a free throw was something we asked Jamal about. I worked my hardest not to get him fined in that situation or surfacing that. But I think Tim Ryan with the Associated Press said it was like just the 8th time in the last 50 years that a team's starting 5 didn't attempt a single free throw. And that's rare, obviously, around the league, but extremely rare for the Magic. So he and the Magic were kind of upset. I think both sides were kind of upset with the officiating kind of went that way. But I just think Jamal Mosley talked about it so much, like you can't let your offense impact your defense. And not just with Jalen, but I think the whole team kind of lost point of that, kind of lost that inner control of fouls on one end.
Yeah.
And you get caught complaining, and the other team's going the other direction, and the Knicks shoot a lot of threes, and they certainly did that, and they just took advantage of opportunities when the Magic maybe weren't focused.
I want to pause for a second because, I know there's a lot of people that out there that are going to listen to this, and, when you mentioned Jalen Suggs being one of the reasons this Magic team lost last night, I had, I also posted a thing online last night that got a little bit of backlash that said, playing hard is not a cover up for playing bad, right? And I thought Jalen Suggs had a fairly bad game last night. He did some good things for sure, but he wasn't shooting very great. His shots weren't falling at all. Like I said, a lot of foul issues. He fouled out, just like you mentioned, too much emotion. And not the right place, in my opinion. That doesn't mean we don't like Jalen Suggs, people. Okay, right. We all understand he is playing, and I got backlash because of he's playing without his stars. We all know that. It's still okay to admit that a player had a bad game, despite context and their role changing. It's okay. Sorry, I just had to put that out there. It kind of rubbed me the wrong way that people are hating on that comment. I'm like, guys, it's fine. Yeah, it is interesting because Suggs is such an emotional player. He does really drive up and down emotionally, and most of the time it's in a good spot, but you can tell there's these games where it's hard for him to shake things off, and it gets into his head. Let
me say this real quick. I'll add in, he's worked a lot. He's worked a ton on that.
Yeah,
and you mentioned Arnie
Kander.
You mentioned Arnie Kander at the top of this, talking about injuries. I think Jalen will tell you first thing, Arnie has been a huge impact on him. I know, during timeouts or during stoppages, he'll go right to Arnie and they'll work on his heartbeat and his breathing and do some breathing techniques and breathing practices. That's a big deal. And I think Jalen, again, has done a lot of work towards controlling those emotions.
I had Arnie on the podcast over the summer to just learn a little bit more about him and his work. And he is not just a physical coach. He very much is an emotional coach and helps these guys with the mental side of the game as well, which is really cool. And yeah, he's gotten better at that. And I'm sure his emotions are in a different spot considering the pressure that's on him at this very moment, right? He's going to be, thanking God the moment Paulo is back on that court supporting him, taking a little bit of the pressure off Suggs, and things start to fall a little bit more naturally in place. And, today's another day. We also know he's probably shooking it off and ready for the next one. So, what does this team have to do to be ready for the Thunder on Thursday? It's another nationally televised game. I'm actually surprised it's still a nationally televised game. To be honest, like they flex out one game with Paulo out, but then bring it back, and the Paulo and Franz are out, and they still have it on the schedule. I'm a little confused there, but it's there regardless. National televised game versus the Thunder. Okay, we know Jalen has to hit, but like, what's got to happen for the rest of the roster to hit? What's got to happen for KCP, for Cole Anthony, for just the rest of the role players not named Tristan Da Silva and Mo Wagner? Because that's outside of maybe Goga, who is consistent.
He's basically the starter at this point.
It's Wendell Carter is not playing very aggressive offensively. Like, what do we got to do to get some of the rest of these role players to start kind of finding their groove here, Jason? Because it's really odd that Wendell Carter, talented offensively. Most people talk about him being an offensive, versatile player, and that's his strength over his defense, right? Contavious Caldwell-Pope, two-time champion as a starter, has never really found he had like a very small window of finding his shot. And other than that, he has been awful, the worst start to his career. Shooting wise, he's still doing good things on the court. But like when you look at a game last night and he gets like 2 shots from 3, like there's too many games where he's literally getting only 2 or 3 shot attempts. Like, what's got to happen to get these guys more involved in the offense? Is it an offensive scheme thing? Is it the players just not being aggressive within the scheme? Is it the way the defenses are defending them? Like, it looks like they're able to get open looks, but it doesn't look. I'm just confused on why there's so many role players that are underperforming to their norms right now, and really since the start of the season.
Yeah, I think as great as Tristan was against the Knicks, like that was probably his best game.
It was, career high for sure.
The way he was cutting, the way he was moving at the ball, he's consistently have fought for rebounds, but he did a good job of a little bit of everything against New York. The problem was he took 17 shots. I was sitting next to a scout last night, and he was pointing that out to me. That's just too many shots. Like, obviously, sometimes that's the flow of the game. That's how the games go. I don't think the game plan was for Tristan Da Silva to take 17 attempts. Like, that's not probably, to Jamal Mosley's credit, not how you would want a game to go.
Sure.
It doesn't mean they can't go through Tristan. He was obviously doing some good things, and he took advantage of the opportunity and those cuts and whatnot, and players found him the same way players found Mo in the paint, and Mo had a couple good shots from 3 that he hit. I just think he just can't take 17 shots. Like, I'm not saying again, that wasn't the plan, but Wendell Carter just has to be more aggressive. I think that the lineup with Wendell and Goga has worked well. Maybe time's running out there a little bit on that lineup.
Yeah.
Obviously, when Wendell's out there, he's going to be on the perimeter, but if he's not going to shoot threes, he's not doing much out there on offense. I think he doesn't get enough credit defensively. And obviously, he's really sharp on both ends because he knows the Magic offense. He knows what they want to do. He's really good at setting screens. And Goga Batata does a really good job of his own aspects. He's probably a better rim blocker, but Wendell's a sharper player all around. But I think Wendell has to be a bit more aggressive on offense. I think he would say that himself. Like, he's still working his way back from missing 12 games with the left knee. I don't know if he's 100%. I don't think he would say he is, based on the way he talks about himself sometimes. With KCP, I think some probably misjudged what he was going to be. At the end of the day, he's an elite 3-and-D prospect, specialist, whatever you want to use. But even though he has, two titles under his belt and has offered a lot of guidance to this young team and has defended at a high level, he needs to shoot better. He did have that little stretch where right after he had his latest kid, him and his wife, he did have that stretch where he had like at least 3 threes, I think, just 4 games straight or something like that. So he needs to hit 2 or 3 threes a game, I think. Probably should take a few more.
He was looking really good there for a few games, for sure.
Right, he was. It was impressive. It was like, okay, that's why they signed him, right? I think the one other player that, you mentioned a lot of role players. The other player that I'm not even sure exactly if it's mental or they're not going to him as much, whatever it is, but I think Anthony Black has started out really well. I think I read today or was looking into his numbers, like he has not shot well. It seems like he's guaranteed a handful of turnovers a game. I think with Anthony Black, like he's told me even when he was playing better earlier this season, he didn't feel like he had played his best. And clearly now he's not playing anywhere near what he could do. It just seems like he's guaranteed to have two or three, maybe even four, maybe even five turnovers a game. His dribbling needs work. His shooting needs work. Again, it's growing pains. I mean, he went from being a point guard at Arkansas to last year essentially being asked to just kind of wait on the perimeter, stay in the corner. And towards the end of the year, we saw him attack a little bit, but certainly over the course of summer league into training camp, and now he's you know initiating the offense, ball handling. He's splitting. When Cole Anthony's on the court, they're kind of going back and forth between the two of them about who's running the offense for that second unit or the bench that bench group. And we heard so much talk about Anthony's improvement throughout training camp. Like that was the common theme, and he did have a good start to the season. But in the past month, in the past few weeks, the past couple of weeks, really, it just seems like he's lost that offensive touch. I mean, he's still a really lengthy player and helpful on defense. And I'm not saying he shouldn't get out of the rotation. I think he quite honestly needs to play through this. He needs to figure out things. And it probably doesn't help again that these rotations and lineups are mixed and roles are changing constantly. And again, I just think it's so important to remember that Anthony is just a second year player and he did play a lot last year and they're not going to make excuses, but the reality is that there are growing pains with all these guys. But in terms of talking about what needs to happen, you're not going to get 30 plus points from Obar every single night. So they really need that second unit to stabilize a bit. I mean, we saw Corey Joseph come out of that third unit and in that third quarter against the Knicks, and they went on a little bit of a run, cut the deficit to 6 points. I mean, the fact that Jamal went to him is kind of a signal towards the options that he was limited to against New York, at least with AD not playing well and Cole Anthony struggling. I mean, Cole's had such an up and down year, more down than up, of course. He'd be the first one to admit that. I just think the bench is kind of missing its flow, and I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that there's no Paolo, no Franz. I mean, think about when both those guys were healthy, it was always kind of Paolo or Franz. One would be on the court.
They did a great job with staggering there.
Like that staggering is no longer there. There's no more staggering. And Jamal's gone back to 10-man lineups, even 11 guys, sometimes even 12 guys. I mean, Caleb Houston played 36 minutes the night before, and he played last night against New York. So for the G League, I should say.
Yeah.
And then he played against New York. So that just shows Jamal's willing to see what sticks. And they did kind of find a groove. Obviously, Franz still being available. But now that Franz is not and Paolo still isn't, he's certainly having to adjust. And I think it's impacting everyone. I really do.
It kind of reminds me a little bit of when Paolo first went out. There was like 3 or 4 games in a row we saw 3 different, multiple different starting lineups and all sorts of different types of rotations within it. And it was just like collecting as much data as you could to see what was going to work and what was not going to work. And I'm hopeful with this time off, with these practices, that we'll be able to see Coach kind of find his groove with this team a little bit sooner. And again, he could find his groove and they could still get their rocks knocked off of them, more times than not, because they're missing their 2 best players and there's other people that are injured up and down the roster. I'm sure Jalen Suggs isn't 100% healthy. I'm sure Contavious Caldwell Pope. Yeah. I mean, there's injuries, Plantar fasciitis doesn't just all of a sudden go away. Wendell is probably feeling it in some way, either in his knee or in his foot, knee with the tendonitis and stuff like that. So it's like, Contavious Caldwell Pope, he's got a lot of miles on him. He's probably feeling something. These guys are. It's a good time for them
to ankle.
Yeah,
they're battling.
Ankle.
Like, the effort's there.
But the nice thing is they're home. They're sleeping in their own beds. They have multiple days off between now and the next game. You and I were joking. It's like, cool, is 2 games in 10 days is kind of nice, right? The team's enjoying that too. And then when they do come back, it's a home stand, which doesn't mean this team isn't going to be When they're on the road, they're still not, they're doing what they need to do on the road, but it's a lot easier and a lot more comfortable when you're doing it in your own practice facility on the schedule that you want it to be, not on someone else's schedule, not having to do with, airplanes and hotels and stuff like that. These guys, most of them all live very close to the training center and the facility and stuff. So it'll be great to have this little kind of end of year stretch, and hopefully come January, this team's looking a lot healthier. Hopefully Paulo's back or very, very close to it at that point. And some of these other guys are feeling a little bit more rested, particularly after this next week or so where they have the schedule's a little bit hard teams, but not as crazy. This Magic team has played the most games in the league, I believe, still, and the most road games. Maybe that's changed a little bit in the last couple of days, but as of like late last week, that was still the case, which is wild to think about. Jason, it's kind of a dark time right now. All right. But it's not all that dark. Mo Wagner just had a career high 32 points last night. Tristan da Silva also career high. I think it was like 20, 21 points last night. What's something optimistic that you've been enjoying during this weird kind of 3 games? What's something that you are finding and kind of hanging your hat on as silver linings and optimism and hope for this roster?
It's interesting. I was on with NBA radio the day I flew back from Philadelphia after that last road trip. And I did a radio hit with NBA radio before the Franz news came out. And I was on with Rick Mahorn and a couple of the other NBA Sirius XM people. And they were asking me, could the Magic make a trade? What about the trade deadline and et cetera, et cetera. We all know that conversation is separate. But I said at the time, knowing how this franchise works, and I don't really see them making a move until they can see some sort of stability with their roster. But with that said, the trade is Franz and Paolo coming back. Right?
Yeah.
So you talk about the team needs. I'm not saying they shot well. This team shot well in the 5 games we have with Paolo this year, and obviously we saw what happened last season. But when you think about what they need right now, they need someone who can score. Right? They need some steady hand on offense. They need to get back into the paint. They need to attack the hoop. They need 3 points. That's Paolo and Franz. So I think we should, praise that Mo Wagner doesn't care who's on the court, doesn't care that he has 30 plus points. He's still going to give it his all. I think Goga Batase, as I mentioned before, battling through those ankles that he kind of dealt with on the road, he's still giving it his all. The fact that this team hasn't quit in any shape or form, now that we would expect them to, under Jamal Mosley, and know that these, hopefully, knock on wood, for their sake, that these aren't season-ending injuries for Paolo and Franz. We obviously don't expect them to be, but, anything can happen, I suppose, but that doesn't seem likely, especially for Paolo, who could be back sooner than later. I just think that idea that as these guys play together in different rotations, different lineups, that at some point your stars are going to be back. And I think that's something to look forward to. And in the meantime, you can enjoy this really hard-fought basketball team. I mean, they're defending at a high level. To hold the Knicks to 100 points is pretty remarkable, and let alone without some other guys and not everyone being healthy as you expected. So I think the positivity in this is, right now it's I don't want to say ugly basketball, but it's maybe basketball from 10 to 15 years ago compared to the current league.
It's ugly basketball.
So, but with that, they're going to win games their way. They don't have to be pretty. They don't have to, for that team. And knowing that once these guys get back, once even Paolo gets back, that's the trade essentially that they're going to be making with nothing in return besides this time, of course, without them. But I think that's the positive message that, number 1, they haven't quit. Number 2, they're not going to. Number 3, once you get past this rough stretch, everyone else in the league. I know there are a lot of injuries around the league. You look at Jared McCain just having his knee injury just the other day. It seems like injuries are piling up.
Everywhere now.
Once this team gets back to full strength, whatever people wanted to call that, but once their bodies are back on the court and everyone else has played the amount of games they've played, they're going to have fresh legs towards the end of this, and they're going to be able to make a push. I just think that's really exciting to think about, and it should be intriguing to see how they continue through the stretch, but also know that these guys are going to be back, and they're working towards that for sure.
I think you're right there. The biggest move for this team is getting healthy. We said that a couple of years ago. Thankfully, we haven't dealt with too much injury since, last year a little bit here and there, but nothing compared to what this Magic team dealt with a handful of years ago. So that's kind of what they need to happen again today. You're right. They need to get healthy. I still think we could see nothing crazy during the trade deadline, but something small around there. But they're not going to do anything early like what we just saw Golden State Warriors and the Nets do, where they're trading right now. They're not desperate. They're not on a crazy timeline. They don't need to do that, right? They're not in championship or bust mode right now to make a premature move like that. So I agree with you there. And I think another thing is, like, we were kind of learning it with Franz when it was just him and Paulo out. I think, yes, ultimately, like, we want these guys all playing a peg or two lower on the priority order. But I also do think when they kind of shift back into that, they're going to learn more about themselves and about how they can help the team by having to play in these higher roles. So when they kind of fall back into their more natural position in their hierarchy, that they'll be able to better support the team during that time period. So I think that'll be fun when this team gets a little bit healthier. Until then, I think everyone needs to wear some waist and rib pads so they don't get any more torn obliques. I'm wearing one just out of safety. Even if you're just walking, sleep with one on. Let's just put a little bit of extra protection around these guys. We just can't have it. We can't have it again. Jason, thank you for coming on the show. When we talked a little while ago, I was like, man, we had talked at the beginning of the season about getting you on the show more frequently, because last year we only got you on the show once or twice. This year we're already at twice. We're only just past like a quarter way of the season. We got many more opportunities to reconnect and talk about this team, ideally when they're a little bit more healthier and on a little bit of a winning streak and not a 2-game losing streak, I would say. Jason, go ahead and let everyone know where they can find you and your work. But if they're listening, they should know.
Right. I was going to say, I mean, look, the opportunity for them to win, it's so long going in the season. There's going to be more stuff's going to happen. We know that. And eventually Paolo and Franz are back, and everything's not going to go exactly to plan, of course. But to that point, we're only a third of the way. We just crossed a third of the way. So that means there'll be more opportunities for me to come on this podcast.
Absolutely.
And in the meantime, obviously, OrlandoSentinel.com is where you can find all my work. I have a great piece dropping on Corey Joseph. I talked with him in the locker room with a couple of the guys after the next game, so that's going to be dropping soon. And OrlandoSentinel.com, at The Real Beede on Twitter, of course. And I'm excited to be home for Christmas and eventually, see how the rest of the season goes.
Magic fans, thanks for tuning in. Jason, thank you for joining the show. It's always a pleasure to talk with you. I know we talk pretty frequently offline, but when we get to have these expanded conversations, it just kind of brings everything a little bit better and more full circle for me. So that's going to wrap up this episode, everyone. Let's go, Magic. See you next week. Peace.